as you can see, we have a fairly large panel here to talk about how we might define existential therapy and to look at some of the different ways we might define it and different ways it is defined in different geographical locations, in different countries around the world. So we're going to really talk about that, but let me give you a little background on this project, if you will. To begin with, about 3 years ago, I was asked by a publisher, by Sage Publishing, to write a chapter for a textbook on existential therapy. And the editors of this, this chapter was just published about a week ago. The title of the textbook is Contemporary Theory and Practice in Counseling and Psychotherapy, Sage Publications. So the editors of this textbook wanted the chapters, and not just my chapter, everyone's chapters, but my chapter on existential therapy, they wanted it to focus not on philosophy, not on theory, but on practice. In other words, what does an existential therapist really do? What do we do when we're sitting with patients? How do we work? So you can imagine that was immensely challenging for me. To focus on the actual practice of existential therapy rather than on the theory and on, of course, the underlying philosophy, the phenomenology, etc. So it took me about 3 years to write this chapter, and again, it was finally published about a week ago. And what I'll do is I will read just a little bit of the chapter to you, but if we go back about 6 months or so, the beginning of this year, there was initiated an online discussion. The online discussion started out about the possible merger of the Confederation, is it the Existential, correct me on this, Emmy, the Existential Confederation with the ICE-CAP?
Yeah, ICE-CAP, yes.
Okay,
yes.
So there was a communication about a possible merger of these two existential organizations. And we started having some discussions about this online. It was Kurt Schneider, Alfred Langley initiated it, and also Ernesto Spinelli, whom we are missing here, unfortunately. I wish Ernesto could have been here. You're all familiar with Ernesto Spinelli's work. So, as that discussion began, let me just see how we're doing on time. As that discussion began, one of my thoughts was, look, and I think Ernesto as well agreed, can we really have these kind of confederations, a world confederation, without some kind of agreed upon operational definition of what existential therapy is? What is it that we're organizing around? What is it that we're really doing, that we're really talking about? What is this approach? So then the discussion turned to how might we try to come up with a working definition that we could all, if not fully agree on, that we could all live with. You know, one of the things that I found in writing the book chapter was that there is a tremendous diversity, and Emmy has spoken to this, I think it was last night. There's a tremendous diversity within the field of existential therapy. And there's a lot of divergence, and there is a lot of disagreement about what existential therapy is and what existential therapists really do. So we started this online discussion, which was sometimes very heated, as you might imagine, And involved in this discussion were people from all over the world, some of these, most of these individuals who are here with you today, who will introduce themselves in a little bit, and many, many others who are not here. Is Todd DuBose here by any chance? No? Okay. Many, many others were participating in this discussion. And again, heated, if not always heated, it was always an animated discussion, very animated. So there's a lot of energy and excitement about trying to define it. And what happened was that I put forth sort of some of my definition. Of course, I wrote a 55-page book chapter, which really, in essence, is my definition of existential therapy, because I try to define what it is we do in existential therapy. But I put forth a couple of paragraphs initially about using it as a definition, and then we started as a group. It was kind of an interesting process, very collectively, editing each other's and revising each other's different definition versions, so that we started coming up with a definition that we all were working on at the same time. For example, what I'll do is I'm going to read to you my initial submission of a definition, and then I'm going to, I'll just tell you a little bit about some of Ernesto Spinelli's comments, and then these panelists will talk with you about their comments.